Hello and welcome to our ACT training. You're probably here because you've heard or you know that ACT is cool. ACT is cool. There are over 1,000 randomized control trials now available that focus on a variety of different clinical conditions where ACT has been helpful. The World Health Organization has developed an ACT-based self-help intervention, very low barrier, easy to use for refugees across the world. ACT is being used in some schools to support social and emotional learning development of students. ACT has benefit actually for clinician burnout. And it's being used in lots of different contexts, including coaching and sports performance, and even in kind of corporate settings. So ACT is really cool. It has taken off over the last 25 years or so, and yet there's a problem. I'm part of the competency and dissemination pillar for ACBS, and we are looking at sort of what happened with ACT. So one part of the story that's important to know is that ACT really started out small. It actually started getting developed in the 1980s, and there wasn't the first publication until of the manual until 1999. And so ACT had this kind of big, you know, announcement to the world, and kind of got big. And over the last 10 or 15 years, we've seen it show up in lots and lots of places, and lots more folks have shown interest in learning ACT. But at the same time, that initial ACT training that was developed, it was when it was just a few hundred people. These were people that were working together for years and years, and lots of close connections, and close to the model developers, and making sure that they learned all the kind of behavioral background that they needed to do ACT well. And now we're worried that that's not so much the case. That lots of people are offering ACT. Lots of people sort of see ACT, and they sort of see pieces of it that seem cool, and so they grab pieces of it and they sort of go, "Okay, I'm an ACT therapist, but what does that mean? And are they doing ACT well? And is it anywhere close to what it was when it was initially developed?" Part of the other challenge is that there is no certification in ACT. ACBS has consistently uh, fought against that, and they have some good values-based reasons for doing so. They don't want to create a hierarchy where people are then gatekeeping kind of who trains and who's accessing. Not to mention the fact that these kind of arbitrary certifications that you see in psychotherapies, they don't really mean very much. They tend to be kind of money-making things, and ways for people to sort of, focus on, putting things on resumes, but they don't necessarily have much evidence that they lead to better practice. So for those reasons, the community has decided not to do certification. But this also leads to challenges, right? So therapists who want to do a good job learning ACT and making sure that they're getting good training before they use it with clients are a little bit in the dark about when and where they can do that, and um, to know kind of what the process has been. And so there's been a lot of kind of choose your own adventure sort of style training paths for people in ACT, and we really don't know which ones are kind of best, or really where overall, if we looked at everybody who sort of says they're doing ACT, what it is that they're doing. So what we see right now in the community is a lot of what's called train and hope. So you'll have these kind of uh, quick, 1 day, 2 day, maybe even 4 or 5 day intensive trainings, where you get to see kind of the whole model and kind of play with it, hopefully get some kind of personal experience with it. And then, we tell people, oh, by the way, you should get some supervision consultation, good luck to you. Um, but those pathways aren't always there. And so we just sort of train and hope that things go well. At our agency, we've had folks kind of caring about ACT for 10 years or more now, but um, because we also haven't focused on delivering kind of specific trainings, and haven't made it something that we require people to do, or focus a lot on. we've done more of kind of the support and hope model. So we do something like every month, we do pieces, we share things, share resources, give opportunities where we support people if they have interest in ACT, and we hope that that support leads them to kind of doing more reading and self-studying and getting better. And we don't super know if that works either. So we're trying to do something new here, where we're gonna train more intentionally, um, to help develop competencies with ACT, and we're going to rely on recently proposed set of standards, international training standards for ACT, that say basically common sense things like you need to be exposed to the different kind of key concepts, you need practice with the skills, you need feedback. People who give trainings and supervision need to have knowledge and skills themselves, like we know is true with any kind of complicated psychosocial intervention, like any psychotherapy model. So it's nice to have those standards and some ways to aim to, which is what we're going to do. So what I want to do in this first initial video is just share some of the training challenges that we've seen come up when people start to learn ACT, and to give you kind of two big ideas to hold on to that I think will help you avoid unnecessary confusion. Confusion by itself isn't a bad thing. It's a nice thing to sit with and part of learning, but I don't want folks to have unnecessary confusion. And so if there's a few ideas that we can get you off into a good direction, I want to share that with you. Okay, so the first idea that I want to share is a distinction between two words, between function and topography or form. So when we say topography or form, we mean like sort of like what a behavior looks like, what it actually looks like in the moment when you see it. And by function, we mean the impact that the behavior has on the environment. And so as a simple example, I'll just do this. I'll just make this gesture of like opening a door. So imagine that coming up on a door and it has one of those kind of straight out lever type openings. And so I reach out like this and I pull down and over and the door opens, right? So topographically, what we could do is we could describe the behavior that I just did. I reached my arm out, I twisted my hand, I pulled back, right? That's what it looks like. Now, functionally, if I had pulled on a lever and opened it, then I would have changed the environment such that the door is open. So functionally, I've opened the door, right? And so keeping those things separate is really helpful, because obviously we could have different topographies that will open the door, right? So I don't just have to open the door the same way. Is it like this? I can also use my foot. I can reach up and I can pull the lever down with my foot, or I can move it down with my elbow and then wedge it open, things like that. I can get a rope and I can go and throw a rope on it and pull it open like that. Lots of different topographies that serve the same function, have the same impact. They open up the door, right? And another important idea is that the same topography, that behavior that I did, could have different functions in different contexts. So for example, let's say I wasn't actually trying to open the door. I'm at a restaurant and I see my friend outside, and I can see that my friend is confused. They don't know how to get in, and so I'm going to show them that the door is right there. And so I signal them, and then I put my hand out and I mime kind of pull the lever down, pull it open, right? And if they follow that, they open up the door, and the function is now the door is open for them. So the topography of my behavior is the same, right? But the function is very different. In the first, it was opening an actual door for me. And in the second one, it was signaling communication to a friend. So we want to keep these two things distinct. Now, my guess is that as I explain this to you, this is not really news. I don't think I've blown your mind by saying, there's different topographies and different functions, and you get that there's different ways to open a door, right? So if our whole job as ACT therapists was to help people open up doors, it would be pretty easy. I mean, we would know what to do. We could work with the different topographies and keep focused on the different functions that we want. So I want to talk about two different challenges that come when we try to scale up this toy example of like the topography and function of opening a door, to the real complexity of working with clients and people in the world. So the first challenge is, in a lot of cases, we can't just see the function that is happening, because we're going to start working with private events, things like thoughts and feelings and urges and body sensations, things that sometimes we use the phrase happen sort of inside the skin. So there are things that happen inside the skin, and the cool thing about ACT and the functional contextual model that we'll look at is it's actually not a problem that they happen inside the skin. We don't give them any special status that they happen inside our bodies rather than outside in the world. But of course, if there are things that are happening inside kind of a person's skin and aren't kind of overtly available, they're going to be harder for us to notice, right? So it's like if you were if you turned your hand and you were helping somebody open the door, but you couldn't actually see what they were doing with their hands, right? Or similarly, you could use the metaphor of, like, if you're trying to help someone escape an escape room and you've never been there, you're not going to be able to just kind of know, like, oh, you walk over here and press this button and the key comes up. You're going to have to ask them things like, what are you noticing? What are you trying? How is that working? You're going to be able to stay functional, but you're not going to be able to directly see some of the important things that go into your functional analysis. And so you're going to need to make some guesses based on kind of client response. And you're going to need a lot of self-report in cases, right? You're going to ask people, what are they noticing? Are there some of these private events that show up for them that are relevant for that? So that is the challenge, one of the challenges that we'll face, but it's not insurmountable. We're not gonna change what we do. We're gonna kind of bring the lens there. And the second challenge that we see when we try to scale it up is it can be easy to lose this sense of this functional lens that was so clear when we were talking about the door, when we start to think about the complexity of real people. So, quick story, in the 80s, there's a young man in Spokane, went to the community college and then went to a school, Gonzaga University, as an undergrad. And he was a big reader, and he had read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And he went to his professor, psychology professor, and he says, Man's Search for Meaning, this, I love this, this is what I want to do. And the professor said, cool, how are you going to do it? And that man actually was Kelly Wilson. And the professor was Sam Leigland, who was a psychology professor who was a behaviorist and so was aware of kind of behavioral principles. And so after Kelly finished at Gonzaga, he went to the University of Nevada, Reno, and studied with Steve Hayes. And Kelly brought in kind of one of the last pieces of what was developing as ACT at the time, and that was the focus on values. And so values in ACT are connected to kind of this idea that Kelly had of those ideas, those sort of existential values kind of pieces that are in Man's Search for Meaning and other things like that. Those really matter to human beings, right? We care about those symbolic, bigger kind of pieces, many of us. And if we don't have a therapy that can address that, then we're going to be missing something. We're not going to be able to help other people. So ACT does have those pieces. But because this is more symbolic, because it looks a lot different than sort of just a client opening the door and those kind of pieces, um, it's easy to kind of lose that functional lens and to go back and look at kind of more everyday psychology ideas. So, what are some of the pitfalls that can happen if we lose this focus on function and go back to topography? Well, one place we can struggle is we can wonder if ACT is going to apply to different kinds of clients, particularly like younger clients or clients that have different variations of verbal or cognitive abilities. So, a lot of the classic kind of ACT interventions that you might have seen or that ACT is known for may be demonstrated with verbally competent adults. And then people naturally wonder then if it's going to work with younger children or folks with different kinds of abilities. And in doing that, they're oftentimes kind of imposing this sort of mechanistic, static kind of idea of what language and cognition is on those folks, and they're not staying functional. But if you stay functional with ACT and the underlying theory of relational frame theory, RFT, you can understand verbal and cognitive abilities in this way. And actually, some of the interventions developed around RFT are helping increase IQ for folks, helping folks with autism learn to take perspective and to develop some of these symbolic abilities. And then, as soon as they do that, then they also need the same help with those thoughts and feelings and things that they're now able to recognize. And so they need a version of ACT. Obviously, that looks different in how that gets delivered. Working with values for a 5-year-old is going to look different than values for someone who's retiring as the CEO of a company. But we're going to lose something if we decide to look at this with a non-functional lens. Similarly, we're going to see this a lot with self-disclosure. So there are kind of these topographies of self-disclosure that we talk a lot about in grad school. And then, of course, they also bail out to this idea of like, and, do it in the service of helping the client. Well, there's a good functional way to sort of answer that question. So we can look at things like self-disclosure in therapy from a functional lens rather than this kind of mechanistic view. And finally, even something like the term experiential. So you may have heard that ACT is an experiential therapy. If we look at what experiential means kind of in a topographic sense, it's usually around something kind of creative, kind of arts based, using art and music and things like that. Those are topographies that get linked to experiential. But from a functional sense, that's not really what we're trying to do. More so in ACT, we're trying to be experiential so that we can bring clients' experience to bear on the intervention and to use some of the knowledge that they have that isn't just verbal. And so we're experiential in that way, but there are folks that are doing lots of kind of arts-based interventions that are not ACT-based, they're not functional. And there's lots of good ACT work that is being done functionally that doesn't look particularly experiential in a topographic sense. You're just slowing the client down, you're having them notice. That can be consistent with the functional definition of experiential rather than a topographic one. Um, so those are some examples of places where we can kind of be talking past each other if one person's talking in terms of topography and the other person's talking in terms of function. And there's kind of two big risks of doing this and staying topographic. One I think is more personal to the clinician. Obviously, the value added by ACT is the understanding of how to work functionally with challenging things like private events, thoughts and feelings, and so on. And so if we don't do that, if we just work topographically, we may not do the best for our clients. We may get confused. We may get frustrated. We may end up not getting what we want. I think the second risk is kind of bigger. I think there's more at stake for the potential folks that could be recipients and beneficiaries of ACT and RFT interventions, which is if we miss that this applies to them, we may not be doing a good job as professionals, I think, in making sure that these interventions give a good look. So, for example, um, all of us have to decide whether or not we care to do ACT with our clients, and we might decide we don't want to do it. It's not for us. We like other things, or maybe we like doing it, with our very verbal adult clients, but we don't really want to do things, with young kids with ACT because it seems hard and not as easy. And we might have really good alternatives that meet the purpose, and so that is fine. But I think the risk is if we think of ACT as just another kind of psychotherapy, sort of like you could choose it, you could not, but everything's kind of equally good. I think we're missing really the promise of ACT. So if you think about those RFT interventions that are helping kids with autism develop new functions to be able to go beyond ABA therapy into more of like what looks like more traditional talk therapy and get those benefits. When we see IQs being raised by the kind of relational training that RFT says, and then we see where where these ACT ideas can go really across different contexts beyond just the psychotherapy clinic, but out into the world, into sports and those places. If we think of ACT as just another therapy, um, we might be missing that those things, those potential sort of benefits, even if we're not going to do them, they're pretty cool, and they might need kind of support for them. So if we're too focused on topography, we might be missing kind of the whole benefit of the functional approach. So that's my really big first encouragement in terms of just the training, is to just keep those functional glasses on and let function go everywhere. Even if you can't always like see it or like track it in every moment, like that takes practice. That there'll be some confusion there, but like don't turn it off. Don't right like don't turn off the idea that like function goes out the window when you're with a supervisor and talking about cases there. Function is potentially in the room with the supervisor, right? When the supervisor cares about things because of funders who give them priorities, and the supervisor is trying to navigate all the kind of rules with funders, like those funder like function goes there all the way everywhere. And so you might not be using that in the room, but just kind of open up this idea and see if you can kind of track that a little bit as time goes on. Like what would it be like to take a functional lens into all of your interactions? The other thing I see as a challenge with this is when people start going, they they borrow a lot of ACT topographies, which is fine. When we're new to something, we need examples, and so we borrow examples from books and exercises and things like that. And that's fine. Those are very topographical, right? Like a book on ACT for OCD, for example, isn't really doing a full functional analysis because they don't know who the person reading the book is. They are doing a specific topography, and they've designed it to hopefully kind of tap into those core functional processes of psychological flexibility and be useful as a self-help book. Um, but what I see happen sometimes is people take kind of those topographies, they'll take a worksheet, they'll take a chapter, and they'll sort of do the thing, and they do the thing, and then they kind of look up, like it's like coming up for air when you're swimming, and go like, did we do it? Do we do it? What's going on with the ACT stuff? Okay, and then they go back into topography underwater. So let me deliver the next chapter, do the next thing, and they come up again, and they go, what did I get? What happened? What's going on with psychological flexibility? What did I do? And what they're missing there is this understanding that like this awareness of function is continuous. So we might strategically decide to do an intervention, an exercise as scripted, or to go through with it before we start checking back in with clients to sort of see what's happening functionally and to make our reads about whether we've moved psychological flexibility processes. We can definitely do that strategically, but I think what people miss early on is we don't have to do that. And even if we are doing that, it doesn't mean that function isn't there. So we might not know within 5 seconds of dialogue what's going on functionally, but we can start thinking about that and make hypotheses about what's happening functionally every moment, even during the delivery of kind of scripted or standalone things. So I want you to encourage you to think about like keeping that functional lens and awareness as something that you develop and can tap into at every second. All right, so I think we're ready for the second big idea that hopefully will help kind of keep us on a good track as we move through the training. And this is the idea that everything that we're doing clinically in terms of assessment and intervention is going to be or organized around just two different types of contingencies. And so if you're vague on that idea, the contingency, this is a term that we get from behavior analysis that just talks about the relationship between a behavior and its antecedents, the things that happen before the behavior, and the consequences, the things that follow the behavior. And a lot of times when we're talking about kind of behavior analysis and the functional behavioral assessment, we talk about the ABC contingency, the antecedents, the behavior, and then the consequences. And so as I said, there's two kinds that we're going to have to pay attention to. So the one that people are kind of more familiar with are going to be those direct contingencies. So those are direct things that we do in the environment to increase or decrease the rate of particular behavior. And you may be familiar with this more from working with younger kids and thinking about doing an FBA for them, where you manipulate pieces of the environment to increase desired behaviors and decrease undesired behaviors. And those are usually organized around the four main functions of behavior that we see in behavior analysis. So people working to get tangible things, rewards, potentially kind of sensory seeking things. So singing just for the pleasure of hearing, the song being sung, or to escape or avoid unwanted things. So those are the main functions that uh, guide behavior, and then the antecedents and the consequences are things that we put in place to change the behavior towards the rate that is socially desired by the client and their family. Um, what we're going to introduce with ACT is the idea that there are also indirect acting contingencies. These are going to be contingencies that are based on verbal behavior, things that are not in the environment directly. So if we've got a good kind of verbal repertoire, we can start to develop rules for ourselves, right? We might have a rule that says like, good people don't open doors. I don't know why we'd have that, but that could be a rule. And so if you're analyzing my behavior, so if we go back to that behavior of sort of, you know, that topography of opening the door, but we want to look at door opening behavior, and we want to impact this, increase it or decrease it. Obviously, we've got all those direct contingencies we can play with. You can give me instructions. You can make me really excited about it. You can reward me by paying me money to open doors. You can put things in the environment before and after, but you also might need to look at these indirect acting contingencies. And if I am following a rule like good people don't open doors, if you don't catch that and intervene on that, I may not increase my behavior of opening doors, even with some good direct contingency management, right? Um, Maybe more clinically relevant would be something like, I can't risk something bad happening, right? So maybe sort of the reason that I'm not opening the door is I'm following a rule like I can't risk something bad happening. I don't want to take the risk of opening the door to the unknown. And you're going to have to work with that as well, rather than just kind of direct contingencies. Although these aren't they aren't exclusive. So behavior is under the function of multiple things. So it's under the control of direct contingencies and potentially indirect contingencies as well. And so indirect contingencies rules, that tends to be one place where we struggle if we're doing kind of unhelpful rule following. The other part of verbal behavior that might be in there as an indirect acting contingency is values, right? So in the moment, there may be nothing immediately good that happens from me opening the door. But if we can tap into values or create a function related to values, like maybe I care about opening doors because I care about others and I want to make the world better for them, and having the doors open would allow them to access and go freely, through the building and get the things they need. So there, the verbal value uh, is helping increase that rate of door opening behavior, right? And it's interacting with those direct contingencies that also are influencing my rate of door opening behavior. So the idea here is to kind of simplify a little bit when we're thinking about anything, whether that is, a little kid who doesn't want to stop play, or an adult who isn't sure whether or not they want to go to college, or whether they want to end a relationship, is there's going to be some balance of direct contingencies and indirect contingencies. And our job in terms of being functional and using ACT is to pay attention to both and to figure out where and when we need to work with both. So we looked at a few months ago some examples from Tom Sabo, who's a ACT behavior analyst. He was working with two folks in their 20s, special ed teachers. These are folks that had a verbal repertoire, and they did a functional analysis. They asked each of them, like, what do you want to work on? One wanted to work on diet, one wanted to work on exercise. And when they did the intervention, they started with just direct contingency management. So they added things like monitoring, um, tracking whether the person had done that, taking pictures of like the healthy meals they had done, sharing those with important people and the therapist to get reinforcement, those kind of pieces. So they manipulated just the direct contingency management. They didn't worry at all about the indirect things, the thoughts, feelings, memories, body sensations. And what was interesting in the one case is the direct contingency manipulations were all they needed. So just putting those in place got the person up to kind of eating more healthily in the way they wanted to, and that maintained even after they stopped the interventions. They checked back in, and it worked. And so, in that case, they achieved the goal that they needed or that the client wanted, and they didn't need to worry at all about that. And just think about how different that is from kind of a more structural and mechanistic thing where we sort of analyze and we wonder about, and we might assume that there's, thoughts and feelings about, food and all this stuff that we need to figure out and put into the analysis. But when they looked, they found out that the direct contingencies were all they really needed. So in that case, the client didn't need any specific ACT interventions beyond using the basic direct contingencies, which are fair game for ACT therapists. In the other case of the person exercising, they started with direct contingency management. They had a similar kind of monitoring and reinforcement plan, and it worked for a minute, and then it stopped working, and they weren't basically exercising in the way they wanted to. So then they introduced a new analysis to try to capture and account for these indirect acting contingencies. And so they use the ACT matrix, which is an intervention some of you know. So just a way to help increase client awareness of some of the functional relationships between their internal experiences and some of their behavior. And once they did that, they were able to see the increase in exercising that the client wanted. And so not even a lot of like intervention necessarily around how to work with these thoughts and feelings, but just recognizing them and getting them into the functional analysis and giving that back to the client was enough to change that. So I think this is something that I wish I had heard earlier on when I was new to ACT is direct contingencies matter a lot. They are fair game. You get to play with them just like you get to play with them for all your clients. So you get to work with antecedents and consequences for sure. And you also need to be looking at how is this working? Are there indirect acting contingencies, rules or values, things like that, that are also having an influence on client behavior in helpful or unhelpful ways? As you start to recognize that, then you can add more interventions, right? You can add values, you can elaborate values, you can use those to enhance behavior change where they can, and you can catch those unhelpful rules that clients might be following, and you can use strategies around like diffusion, self as context, and acceptance to transform those so that there are new responses that clients make, so that those rules no longer kind of have this negative impact on the treatment outcome that is important to the client. So those are the two kind of big ideas that I want to leave you with. And then just to wrap up, I just want to talk a little bit about how our training is going to be structured. So one model that's kind of popular when we think about trainings is called the head, heart, and hands model. So thinking about head as sort of that knowledge base, understanding the key concepts and sort of how to use the model. So under the knowledge base piece of ACT. Heart is really having kind of the developing those therapist capacities and qualities to do the work. The big one The big one in ACT that we have to work on is because we don't see emotions and thoughts and memories and all those private events, because we don't see them as dangerous, because we want to help people have a new relationship with those events without necessarily changing them, we also have to look really carefully in ourselves because we may also have some challenges, some of our own processes going on of psychological inflexibility where we take statements as literally true, where we treat some of our own feelings or our clients' feelings as dangerous or something to be fixed. And if we do that, we can lose the heart of ACT, and we can go to a kind of a non-functional place, or we can go to a place where we are supporting kind of experiential avoidance rather than experiential acceptance. So the heart of ACT is a lot of doing our own self-process practice and self-reflection using the ACT techniques on ourselves, noticing the processes, and then using that to bring into our clinical interactions that full heart that helps clients also see that their thoughts and feelings don't need to change, but that we can help them find different ways to respond to them to meet their goals and find a life worth living. And then finally, hands, talking about the particular skills, the techniques of ACT. So our plan is to use videos like this to introduce the key ideas that'll keep us on track with developing competence with the head. So these are mostly kind of heady videos. The group sessions are going to be a mix of kind of head, heart, and hands. There's a therapist who had a good metaphor of learning ACT is like learning a second language, or learning to work functionally is like a second language. And so we're definitely not going to be able to cover all the different topographies, like how to adapt, values for a 4-year-old, and how do we do, a diffusion, with a refugee, through an interpreter. There are just some topographies that I'm sure we won't have time to like talk about, and you'll be wanting more. But my hope is at the end, you'll actually have more confidence and competence in this functional language. So you'll be ready to kind of develop or design or figure out what topographies are needed to activate those functions that you want in an ACT consistent way. We'll have a little bit of opportunity through the group meetings to do some of the heart of ACT to practice some of those things with real things that you've got. But I also think to really get the benefit, I'm going to encourage you to take some of those ideas out and practice them between sessions or when you can. That's where you really can deepen that self practice and that self reflection. I will try to suggest ways to do that are kind of simple, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And then finally, I think what makes our training a little bit unique is we're actually going to measure the impact pre and post on a couple key measures and see if we can help move this towards confidence and competence for you all in ways without doing the kind of train and hope model or doing the support and hope model that we've been doing thus far. So in about 6 months, we will find out what, if anything, we have done, and then we'll iterate from there and decide what would make sense going forward to support your ongoing learning and development with ACT. And thank you for listening.